When I asked what time my son's funeral would be, my daughter-in-law's answer froze the air between us. "He's long gone," Nola said flatly. "We already buried him in a small ceremony for close friends only." The phone slipped in my damp hand as the words hit me. A mother isn't supposed to learn her only child has been buried like an inconvenience. I stood in my kitchen among half-arranged white lilies, Blaine's favorite, since he was little, feeling the world tilt. I had bought those flowers that morning to bring to him at the hospital. The doctors had said he was stable, that there was still time. I managed to whisper funeral, but Nola's tone carried the chill of someone discussing a business errand. Complications from the infection. "It's done, Opal." My knees nearly buckled. When I asked why no one had called, she replied without a shred of warmth. "You didn't answer." I checked my phone, no missed calls, no messages, nothing. "Maybe your phone was off," she said, distracted, as if the details of my grief were an annoyance. Then briskly, "We're thinking Thursday at 2 p.m. small service. Pastor Williams from my church." Not our church, the one where Blaine sang in the choir as a boy, her church where I'd never been welcome. I tried to reason with her, but her voice turned cutting. "Honestly, Opal, it might be better if you didn't come. Blaine wouldn't have wanted a scene, as though a mother mourning her son was something indecent." When I protested, she shot back, "He was my husband. And where have you been these last 5 years?" The words cut because they weren't entirely false. Every visit I'd tried to make had somehow fallen through, always some polite reason from Nola. Too tired, too busy, too much. I hung up numb, the lilies scattered across the tile like ghosts. I called the hospital, desperate for sense. The cheerful operator transferred me to patient records, and a calm voice said there was no record of any Blaine Morrison admitted there. "And no Dr. Henderson either," she added. My hand shook as I hung up. I called the funeral home next, only to be told the arrangements were already completed under Nola's direction, and that she had informed them I preferred to grieve privately. Then, almost apologetically, the woman added, "She just moved the service up to tomorrow at 10 a.m., less than 12 hours away. My son would be buried before sunrise tomorrow without me." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in Blaine's old room, surrounded by dusty trophies and faded photographs, trying to trace where everything had begun to disappear. It wasn't sudden. It was erosion. Missed birthdays, unanswered calls, postponed dinners. I opened an old planner and saw it written plainly in my own hand. Visits, canceled plans, changed always next time. I'd been so afraid of being the intrusive mother-in-law that I'd quietly let my place shrink until there was no space left for me at all. When morning came, I imagined the burial happening without me. The closed casket, the brief prayers, Nola's composed face. Maybe that had always been her plan, to erase me completely. But a week later, the silence broke. My phone rang and her voice exploded down the line. "What are you doing to my life?" she screamed. "The lawyers, the questions you started all this." I gripped the counter, confused. "What lawyers?" "The probate lawyers," she snapped. "They said there's a problem with Blaine's will. They need documents from me. Don't act like you don't know you're the beneficiary." Beneficiary. The word barely made sense. I didn't even know there was a will, I said. The other end went quiet, then a whisper. "He left everything to you." That afternoon, I drove to her house. The woman who opened the door was nothing like the polished widow I knew. Her eyes were red, her hair unkempt, her voice unsteady. Papers littered the counter. She poured coffee but didn't drink. "Blaine changed his will 3 months ago," she said, "right after he started asking questions about you." Her gaze flicked toward the papers. "He hired a private investigator, Opal. He found things, messages, calls. I intercepted emails. I deleted. I pretended to be him sometimes. I thought I was protecting our marriage." Her confession hung heavy between us. I could barely breathe. "You stole my son," I said quietly. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. "I just wanted to be first in his life." Then with a shudder, "The investigator's report is at the lawyer's office. It's all there enough to make Blaine change everything. The house, the savings, the insurance, it's all yours." I left her standing amid the wreckage of her lies, my heart a storm of rage and sorrow. There was no comfort in her guilt, only the sharp awareness of years I'd lost. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the lilies now wilted in their vase, and knew what I had to do next. Tomorrow I would visit the grave I hadn't been allowed to see, and then the lawyer. At 10 a.m., the sun slanted through the oaks at Riverside Cemetery, Section C, Plot 247. A simple gray stone, his name, his years. Nothing else. I knelt pressing new lilies into the soil. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I should have fought harder." The wind rustled through the branches like a voice answering, "Mom, you worry too much." When I rose, I felt a thin thread of calm. My next stop was the lawyer's office. Whatever truth Blaine had left for me waited there, and this time I was ready to hear it. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of lemon oil and old books, a careful order that steadied my hands as the receptionist ushered me in at 11 a.m. David Hartwell was younger than I'd expected, with gentle eyes and a patience that felt like a chair set out just for my grief. He greeted me quietly, then slid a sealed envelope across his desk. "Your son was clear about this," he said. "You hear it from him first." The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Blaine's compact script, the steady strokes he'd used since grade school. For a moment I could only touch the paper as if absorbing some warmth left in the ink. Then I opened it and let his voice back into the room. "Mom," it began, and the word cut through me like a bell. He wrote about odds and infections and doctors who could not promise mornings. He wrote about how our Sunday calls had thinned into polite exchanges that never reached the marrow. He wrote about doubt turning into suspicion, and suspicion into clarity. "I hired a private investigator 6 weeks ago," he said, "because I knew the distance between us wasn't natural. I knew you wouldn't drift without a reason." He summarized the report calls, rerouted emails, deleted texts sent from his phone while he was in meetings, plans canceled that he had never agreed to cancel. "She made a wall and called it balance," he wrote. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." The letter turned soft where it could have turned bitter. "You raised me alone and never made me feel like a burden," he wrote. "I want the rest of my choices to honor that truth." He had executed a new will 3 months earlier and left me the house, the savings, and the life insurance, not to wound anyone, he insisted, but to make right what he could. Then came the part that felt like a hand on my shoulder. "I don't want revenge to make choices for you. If you decide to help Nola, let it be, because mercy is in you, not because fear is in her." At the bottom, a postscript. "The key to the safety deposit box is in the old coffee can on your top pantry shelf." I kept the tag with the box number 247, so you'd know I was pointing. I folded the pages with care I usually reserved for fragile heirlooms and held them to my chest until the ache eased. David came back at 11:20 a.m., giving me time to gather myself. He spoke without hurry, opening a thick file marked with my son's name. Your son documented everything he said. Phone logs, email records, time-stamped messages and statements from neighbors and friends who noticed the pattern. He laid out the estate, a modest house valued at roughly $300,000, a savings account, totaling about $180,000, and a life insurance policy in the amount of $500,000. "The will is clear," he added gently. "Everything passes to you. There is no legal obligation to provide for anyone else." I sat with the figures the way you sit with weather, not resisting, just letting them move through. "What happens next?" I asked. "Next," he said, "you read the full report and the instructions he left. Then you do what you feel is right." He slid a smaller envelope across the desk. Inside were directions to a downtown bank and a card stamped with the safety deposit box number. I traced the digits 247. By 12:30 p.m., my kitchen had returned to its ordinary silence, the kettle humming like a throat clearing before a truth. I pulled a chair to the pantry, climbed to the top shelf, and reached for the old Maxwell House can, the one that had once rattled with tournament fees and pizza money. The lid resisted like a memory that didn't want to be replayed, then gave with a soft sigh. Coins winked up at me, familiar as pocket lint. Nestled among them lay a brass key on a thin tag with the bank's name and that same haunted number. Beneath the key, wrapped in tissue, was the silver bracelet I had given him at 16, engraved with the words I'd chosen when we could not afford anything fancier, my son, my pride, my joy. He'd kept it. He'd tucked it away, not discarded it as if saving a small lighthouse for a foggy night. At 2:30 p.m., I signed the bank ledger and followed an attendant into the vault's chilled hush. Box 247 slid free with the weight of a hardcover biography. Inside a manila envelope held 3 letters dated 18 months ago, 8 months ago, and 6 weeks ago. The first was bewilderment. He couldn't match the chill between us with any fight he could remember. The second was suspicion. Too many excuses, too much choreography. The third was resolve. I'm going to fix this mom. Underneath the letters lay a velvet jewelry case. Inside, my mother's ring caught the fluorescent light and turned it warm. I'd given it to him when he got engaged, saying he might pass it to a daughter someday. He'd returned it to me with a slip of paper. This belongs with you. I slid the ring on and felt the cool circle steady like a decision. The drive home at 3:15 p.m. was all ordinary lights and crosswalks, but it felt like traveling through the interior of a choice. I placed the letters on my dining table in a neat row, the bracelet beside them like a silver underline. I brewed coffee. I knew he would have teased me about, then stood with the cup warming my palms, while the phone rang at 5:10 p.m. Nola's name brightened the screen. I considered silence. Then I answered. Her voice had shed its lacquer. She talked about fear, about a failed engagement long before Blaine, about a vow never to lose another man to a woman's influence. She said the investigator had showed her what she had done and that she could not live with it. She asked to see me at 9 a.m. tomorrow. I said she had 1 hour. After we hung up, I laid Blaine's letters in order once more and listened to the small noises of a kitchen settling for evening. Somewhere between the ring on my finger and the bracelet on the table, a path was forming. Not easy and not soft, but clear enough to follow. Tomorrow I would hear her out. Then I would decide what justice sounded like spoken in my son's voice. At 9 a.m. the next morning, I stood on Nola's porch beneath a sky the color of unpolished steel. The house looked the same, but the air felt stripped of its former perfection. No scent of lavender polish, no gleam on the windows. She opened the door slowly. Gone was the immaculate widow. In her place stood a woman pale and sleepless, wearing wrinkled clothes and a tremor she couldn't hide. "Thank you for coming," she murmured, stepping aside. For the first time in years, she sounded human, fragile, uncertain. The kitchen, once spotless, was now chaos mugs, scattered papers stacked in trembling towers, a half-eaten piece of toast abandoned on a plate. She gestured weakly toward the table. "Coffee," she offered. I shook my head. "Say what you need to say." She took a breath that shuddered on its way out. "I need to start before Blaine," she said, "before any of this." What followed came haltingly, as though each sentence scraped her throat raw. She told me about a man named Marcus, her first fiancé. His mother didn't approve, she said, staring into her untouched coffee. She told him I wasn't good enough. 3 weeks before the wedding, he called it off. Said family mattered more than love. She looked up at me, eyes glossy. When I met Blaine, I swore I'd never let that happen again. I thought if I could control the space around us, we'd never fall apart. I let her speak, though every word felt like walking barefoot across glass. She confessed to intercepting messages, deleting emails, pretending to be Blaine in texts when I reached out. At first I told myself it was small things, protecting him from stress, but it became everything. Her voice cracked. Do you know how twisted it feels to realize you were the villain in your own love story? My throat tightened. You told him not to come when I was in the hospital, I said quietly. She nodded, tears spilling over. He wanted to. He was halfway there when I called and told him you didn't want him to see you weak. She covered her face with shaking hands. I lied because I couldn't stand the way he loved you. It made me feel small. The room filled with her sobs, and for once I didn't interrupt. When she finally looked up, her face was streaked red. He found out, she whispered, 3 months ago. The night before his surgery, he said he was leaving me. He said he'd read the investigator's report that he finally saw what I'd done. He was going to call you after recovery and start over, but he never got the chance. The words sank into me like stones. I pictured my son still alive that morning, believing he might fix what she'd broken. You stole years from us, I said. You let me think my son didn't care. Nola nodded miserably. I know. I destroyed both of you, and for what he died hating me. I deserve nothing. I stood the chair, scraping sharply against the tile. You're right. You deserve nothing. But what I do with that truth that's between me and Blaine? I left before she could answer, my chest heavy, but my steps sure. I drove straight to First National Bank, to the quiet basement where the metal door of Box 247 waited. Inside, I found the manila envelope David had mentioned. 3 more letters, all written in my son's hand. The first was raw confusion he couldn't pinpoint. When I'd stopped answering, couldn't find the crack that had split us. The second carried suspicion. He listed every canceled plan, every excuse that hadn't felt quite true. The final letter was dated 2 weeks before his death. I've confronted her, it said. She admitted everything. I'm going to fix this, Mom. You'll get the truth, even if I don't make it. Tucked beneath the letters was a small velvet box. Inside gleamed my mother's ring, the same one I'd given him when he proposed to Nola. A note lay folded beneath it. This belongs with you. My vision blurred as I slipped the ring on. Somehow it fit perfectly. For 3 days, I did nothing but think. I walked the garden Blaine had helped me plant. When he was 10, read and reread. His letters tried to distinguish my anger from my sorrow. He had left me the power to choose between vengeance and mercy, and the choice felt heavier than the inheritance itself. On the 4th day, I called David Hartwell and asked him to arrange a meeting with Nola. Both of us, I said. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. She arrived trembling, her face hollowed out from sleeplessness. I had already made my decision, but she didn't know it. David laid the will on the desk between us, his voice even. Mrs. Morrison has reached a conclusion regarding the estate. I looked at Nola, this woman who had spent years building a wall of lies so high she couldn't climb out of it. I'm giving you the house, I said. Her head snapped up in disbelief. The house is yours, free and clear, but nothing else. The savings and life insurance will go into a foundation in Blaine's name to help children and grandparents stay connected after family separation. She stared at me stunned. Why, she whispered. Because Blaine wouldn't have wanted you homeless, I said quietly, but he also wouldn't have wanted you to profit from what you did. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't deserve this kindness. No, I agreed, but my son does. I slid a document toward her. You'll sign the statement, a full confession of what you did. It stays sealed unless you ever try to contact me again. And you'll attend real therapy. Not for me, for you. She nodded, trembling. Then I reached into my bag and placed a small photo album on the table. This is Blaine, I said, the boy you never knew. She opened it with shaking hands. Blaine at 5, frosting smeared across his cheeks. Blaine at 17 in his baseball uniform. Blaine at 22 grinning on graduation day with my arm around him. He was my pride, I told her softly. The boy who made me laugh even when we had nothing. When she looked up, her face was streaked with tears. He told me once that you were the strongest person he knew. I nodded. He said the same about you. He didn't want to choose between us, Nola, but you forced him to. She signed the papers with slow, deliberate strokes, each signature a small surrender. Will you tell me about him? She asked when it was done. I hesitated, then remembered Blaine's words. The heart has infinite capacity for love. He once took apart our toaster just to see where the toast went, I said. She smiled faintly. He never stopped doing that, always trying to fix things. He got that from his grandfather, I said. He was trying to fix this too, right up to the end. When I stood to leave, she whispered, "Thank you for not destroying me." I paused at the door. "Don't thank me. Thank Blaine." This was his mercy, not mine. 6 months later, peace had begun to move through my house like a guest who finally felt welcome. Mornings came without that hollow ache I used to mistake for purpose. I'd wake at 7 a.m., brew coffee that still tasted too bitter, and tend the lilies by my kitchen window, the same flowers I dropped on the floor the day Nola told me Blaine was gone. They bloomed stubbornly now, tall and fragrant, filling the room with the scent of endurance. The foundation I'd built in Blaine's name had already helped its first family's grandparents, reconnecting with children they'd lost to pride, anger, or manipulation. Every quarterly report from David brought numbers and names, but what mattered were the letters that came tucked inside handwritten notes from people who'd found their way back to one another. "Your son's story helped me call my mother again," one woman wrote. "We cried, then laughed, then cooked dinner together for the first time in years. Those words healed parts of me no inheritance ever could. Still, grief has a way of echoing even in silence." Some nights I'd pour a second cup of coffee and leave it across from mine, the way I used to when Blaine came home for Sunday visits. I'd tell him what had changed, how the hydrangeas had finally taken root, how the neighborhood kids still played baseball in the empty lot he used to practice in, how the world had kept turning without him, even though it sometimes felt wrong that it could. The ring on my finger and the bracelet on my wrist would clink softly together. 2 small circles, endless, unbroken. Then one afternoon, a package appeared on my doorstep. No return address, only my name written in handwriting I recognized instantly. Inside was a simple wooden frame. The photograph inside stopped me cold. Blaine, maybe 30 years old, laughing in a sunlit garden, his head tilted slightly back as though he'd just heard something funny. On the back, in careful script, were the words, "I found this in his desk drawer." He kept it beside his computer. "I thought you should have it. Thank you for showing me what real love looks like. Nola." For a long time, I stood at the doorway holding that picture, unsure whether to cry or smile. It wasn't forgiveness yet, not entirely, but something gentler. Understanding, maybe, or the faint shape of it. I placed the frame on my mantel beside the others. Blaine at graduation. Blaine at his wedding. Blaine as a boy holding a baseball glove too big for his hand. Now they formed a timeline proof that love, even fractured, had a way of surviving itself. That evening, as dusk poured through the window, I sat at the kitchen table and thought about the day I'd learned my son was gone. How everything since had grown from that single phone call, lies, untangled truths, uncovered love, tested and found unbroken. I realized I no longer needed to imagine what Blaine might have wanted. I could feel it in every decision I'd made. He'd asked me to choose from wisdom, not revenge, and somehow that had led both Nola and me toward redemption, however uneven. When I asked what time my son's funeral would be, my daughter-in-law's answer froze the air between us. "He's long gone," Nola said flatly. "We already buried him in a small ceremony for close friends only." The phone slipped in my damp hand as the words hit me. A mother isn't supposed to learn her only child has been buried like an inconvenience. I stood in my kitchen among half-arranged white lilies, Blaine's favorite, since he was little, feeling the world tilt. I had bought those flowers that morning to bring to him at the hospital. The doctors had said he was stable, that there was still time. I managed to whisper funeral, but Nola's tone carried the chill of someone discussing a business errand. Complications from the infection. It's done, Opal. My knees nearly buckled. When I asked why no one had called, she replied without a shred of warmth. You didn't answer. I checked my